that was a few years back. Said, quote, "Well, there you are, sipping a diet soda, chatting on a cell phone in an asbestos-insulated house, under the shadow of high-voltage power lines, pondering the bald spot on your head that predicts that you are ripe for a heart attack. You start to worry. Living, it's reported, can kill you. New findings and your constant warnings make it easier to believe that these are very dangerous times indeed. We try to guarantee longevity by shunning underground parking lots, building like skyscrapers, crowded subways. We panic over pesticides and radiation, ozone holes and mercury fillings. Are we, as many experts and health organizations insist, inadvertently killing ourselves with weapons and toxins of our own invention? Or have we become a nation of hysterics, oak-brand eating worrywarts, consumed with the fear of sure destiny and the sure certainty of death? Have we become a nation of people that cannot tell the difference between legitimate risks and a 1 in a million doomsday prediction, but all the while nevertheless expecting the government to protect us from all harm? The problem is getting the public to take real risks seriously and ignoring the trivial risks, according to Robert Schupline of the Office of Research for the Center for Food and Safety of the FDA, unquote. So began an interesting article in the USA Today newspaper several years ago. The article was titled, "Can Living Kill You?" And on the front page of the article, thank you, baby. On the front page of the article, no one knows what I need. Men, I have a lesson for you. I was talking to my neighbor. We were looking back on his house. I told Kim, and we were looking back on his house, and his wife was sitting in a rocking chair on the patio. And he turned to me and said, "That's the prettiest ornament in my garden." Wow. Good? I wrote that down.
Have you used it?
No, I'm saving it. I might want to use it.
Because you'll forget what
Yeah, but I want the remedy to fit the crime.
You'll forget what the paper is.
What paper?
The one that you wrote it down on.
Which paper?
Your birthday's coming. If you want a present, you better be using that.
That's right. So in on this article in the USA Today, the artist, there was an artist characterization of a man with his eyes bulging and patches of hair scattered on his bald head and a furrowed brow and fists clenched and they were stuck in his mouth, and he was obviously distraught and afraid that living was going to kill him and afraid that the odds would catch up with him. And so the dilemma in life, I think, as the official from the FDA has suggested in this article, is to discern the real risks from the trivial risks, to understand what are the true bottom lines of life and what they really are. And then with the choices clear in front of us, to choose wisely and then to act in keeping with that wise choice. For example, I'm told that the odds are about 1 in 195 million that you'll ever win the Powerball lottery. I don't know how many of you play that, but if you do, shame on you. You should. It's a terrible waste of money. Don't do it. So it's 1 in 195 million is your chance to win that. And so I think a wise man or woman would invest their money more wisely, and I certainly hope and pray that you do that. On the other hand, the odds are about 1 in 100 that you will be audited by the IRS. About 1 in 100. So the wise man or woman submits their 1040 on time and honestly, truthfully. So, with all of that being said, what is the person who knows God supposed to take seriously? What are we to take seriously? What is he or she supposed to realistically fear or to stand in awe of are to be concerned about. Well, what should he or she positively expect? In other words, what is the bottom line of life when it comes to me and God and how I choose or how you choose to live? In the 28th chapter of Deuteronomy, assumed to die outside the promised land, Moses is finally getting to his conclusion. And for those of us who have been reading and studying the book thus far, it's been 27 chapters of material. And for the Israelites, it's been 3 rather long addresses over that period, as Moses is just full of material that is oftentimes repeated. Lessons from Egypt, lessons from the desert wanderings, lessons from the initial battles with the kings, less instructions about worship that we looked at some last week, lessons about civil, social, and sacramental laws. And all of that is important, no doubt, but at the end of this presentation, I suspect that the average Israelite is, by chapter 28, was probably just waiting for Moses to put this all together. Okay, we've listened to all of that, we remember all of that, we've been told all of that, and here you are, you're rehearsing it all, and it's good, and we understand, and I think they were probably saying, just get to the bottom line. Give us the important stuff in a nutshell. My dad used to say, son, if you'll just get this into your head, you'll have it in a nutshell. All right, for the Israelites, literally. For the Israelites, the question was, what should we take seriously? What's the bottom line, Moses, of all of this that you've given us from God? And Moses, I think, in this chapter answers and says, you're right. We've given that as background. There is a bottom line when it comes to your living and your living with God. And he answers the question about the bottom line, I think, in 3 major ideas or 3 major parts in the next few chapters. And first of all, he says in chapter 28 of Deuteronomy that the possibilities of your life are 2. Now, that kind of narrows it down and simplifies it, doesn't it? You look at what are my possibilities? Well, I can be a doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, but Moses is basically saying the bottom line is there are 2 things, and the first of those 2 is, don't go in front of me. The first one is, he simply teaches them that blessing is the consequence of obedience. And as you look at this passage, you'll notice that it spells out 2 kinds of blessings that are the consequence of obedience. First, he's telling them, for them, that he's talking about individual blessings. And look at what he says in verse 3, chapter 28. You will be blessed in the city, blessed in the country. The fruit of your womb will be blessed, and the crops of your land and the young of your livestock, the calves of your herds and the lambs of your flock, your baskets and your kneading trough will be blessed. You will be blessed when you come in and blessed when you go out. And all of the city merchants and the country farmers and the carpenters and the butchers and the bakers and the candlestick makers. And, in terms of fertility and food and fruitfulness and every action of daily life, God promised the Israelites specific prosperity and success. That's not bad, is it? That's not a bad promise. All that they could and would do in their individual lives would be blessed. Would you like that blessing?
Amen.
Yeah. The second kind of blessing in verse 28, the second kind of blessing, where did you go? Individual blessings, we just read that. National blessings. And you'll notice that in these verses, 7 through 14, that Israel is promised superiority in their military might and economically over other nations. She, as a nation, was promised agricultural prosperity, and she was promised the international reputation of the one true people of God. Notice verse 7. The Lord will grant, let me give you that. The Lord will grant that the enemies who rise up against you will be defeated before you. They will come at you from one direction, but flee from you in 7. Verse 12 through 13. The Lord will open the heaven, the storehouse of his bounty, to send rain on your land in season, and to bless all the work of your hand. You will lend to many nations, but will borrow from none. The Lord will make you the head, not the tail. If you pay attention to the commands of the Lord your God that I give you this day and carefully follow them, you will always be at the top and never at the bottom. Woo! My goodness gracious. You know, I think it's hard to imagine. I was thinking about this as preparing the lesson. How much more God could have promised them? You know, what else could he, individually and nationally? It was as if in these first lines of Deuteronomy chapter 28, that God gives to his people a blank check. He says, I'll sign the signature line, and you just fill in whatever it is you want. Not bad. I wouldn't mind that. Norma would never let me do that. But he says, I'll sign the signature line, and you can write in anything you want on the lines above. If you will obey me, you will have blessings. I guarantee it. Now, I want to mention now, just in passing, and we'll mention in more detail in the latter part of the lesson. You and I are not Israel. Okay? There are individual and national promises, these are, that we're looking at, that go to Israel as a nation. We're not under that covenant. Right? We're not a substitute Israel. All right? So we'll go into that in more detail, but I want you to know that as you think about hot dog, I'm going to get that check out and write it. Okay? The other possibility for life, the second possibility, was cursing is the consequence of disobedience. God uses the first 14 verses to write out that blank check of blessings, but he uses the next 53 verses to talk about the consequences of disobedience, more than 3 times the verses. And when you read this, what you see is the reverse of the individual blessings promised in 16 through 19. And he says, verse 16, you will be cursed in the city and cursed in the country. Your basket and your kneading trough will be cursed. The fruit of your womb will be cursed. And the crops of your land and the calves of your herds and the lambs of your flock. You will be cursed when you come in and cursed when you go out. Man, curses. You're going to be cursed up the gills. You're not going to be able to get out from under it. It's going to hound you like a dog, and it's going to ruin your life if you disobey me. Moses says if you decide to disobey, if you decide to walk away from God and say, I don't need this God stuff. You know, I don't need his laws, and I don't need his parameters around my life, and I don't need his holiness, and I don't need anything that comes from God. I'm walking away from it, and God said, okay, it's your choice. Go on. And not only is the individual blessings reversed, but when you read through the rest of this, you see 40 plus verses of what God will do to a nation as a whole if they disobey. And notice, I want you to notice specifically, each action that will happen is highlighted by, highlined, if you will, by the phrase, quote, the Lord will do this. This is not going to be happenstance. This is not going to be by accident. The Lord is going to do it. In other words, this isn't going to be, you know, that sort of opportunity gone bad, or a run of lousy luck, or the words that I hate nowadays. It's not going to be bad karma. What's going to happen is going to be personally intervention in their lives by God. And let's look at a couple of verses real fast. I may be beating this to death, but I want to get across the point. Verse 20. The Lord will send you curses, confusion, and rebuke, and everything you put your hand to until you are destroyed, and come to sudden ruin because of the evil you have done in forsaking Him. Verse 21. The Lord will plague you with diseases until He has destroyed you from the land you are entering to possess. Verse 22. The Lord will strike you with wasting disease, with fever and inflammation, with a scorching heat and drought, with blight and mildew, which will plague you until you perish. Verse 24. The Lord will turn the rain of your country into dust and powder. It will come down from the skies until you are destroyed. Verse 25. The Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You will come at them from one direction, but flee from them in seven. And you will become a thing of horror to all of the kingdom of earth. Verse 27. The Lord will afflict you with the boils of Egypt, and with tumors and festering sores, and the itch from which you cannot be cured. Verse 29. At midday you will grope about like a blind man in the dark. You will be unsuccessful in everything you do. Verse 32 and 33. Your sons and daughters will be given to another nation, and you will wear out your eyes watching for them day after day, powerless to lift a hand. In other words, he's saying you will get to see your kids tricked off somewhere to live a life of slavery, and there's nothing that you can do about it. 33. A people that you will not know will eat what your land and labor produce, and you will have nothing but cruel oppression all your days. The sights you see will drive you mad. Verse 36. The Lord will drive you and the kings you set over you to a nation unknown, and to your fathers, or your fathers. There you will worship other gods, gods of stone, wood and stone. Verse 45. All these forces will come upon you. They will pursue you and overtake you until you are destroyed, because you did not obey the Lord your God and observe the commands and decrees He gave you. Verse 49. The Lord will bring a nation against you from far away, from the ends of the earth, like an eagle swooping down, a nation whose language you will not understand. Finally, look at verse 65 and then 66. He talks here about putting them into captivity, but notice it's not just physical, it's mental illness. 65. Among those nations you will find no repose, no resting place for the sole of your foot. There the Lord will give you an anxious mind, eyes weary with longing, and despairing heart. By the way, I think that's a good biblical definition of depression. Verse 66. You will live in constant suspense, filled with dread both night and day, never sure of your life. In the morning you will say, if only it were evening. In the evening, if only it were morning, because of the terror that will fill your hearts and the sights that your eyes will see. Now, what's the point? You know, I was kind of excited as we read over through the first 14 verses. Hey, you know, I like this. This is pretty good.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I like this. Yeah, write that check out, Lord. Yeah, it's good. But then, my goodness, if you disobey, if you're disobedient to my way. And the point is that God's people in life had two possibilities. When they specifically obeyed God's word, they're bathed in the blessings of their God. And when they woefully disobey, they have on their hands a passionate God who does not merely go, oh, shucks. Oh, shucks. There go those darn kids again. What are you going to do? God knows what to do. Yeah. He knows exactly what to do, and He's told them what He's going to do, and He's ready to do it. Just, by the way, just an aside here, those words we just read were really prophetic. 824 years later, exactly what God had said came to pass, if you recall. And the nation was dragged off into captivity by the Babylonian Empire. And you remember the story of Daniel. We talked about Daniel last week a little bit. How he gets carted off, the nation is defeated, Jerusalem is destroyed, and you know, it's all over. And so there sits Daniel in the king's household, 700 miles from his homeland. It's about 700, wasn't it, Bill?
Plus or minus.
Plus or minus. But your sandals didn't wear out.
No.
That was good. So he's 700 miles from his homeland, speaking a new language, following new customs. Everything that was familiar to him was destroyed. Mom and dad are gone, and yet Daniel remembers, and he doesn't want to defile himself with the king's food, doesn't want to pray to the Babylonian gods, doesn't want to flow with the tide of that popular culture, as many of us probably would. I mean, think about it. His God had certainly let him down, if you want to look at it that way. His God is nowhere to be found. Why not just roll with the Babylonians? Seems to me that would be easy. When in Rome, do as the Romans. You know? When you're in that wicked shop or that wicked office, just roll. Don't be approved. Don't stand up with God. You know, when you're in that setting, let me interject just a little bit. Our fifth child, our third daughter, has 5 boys, and they're all wrestlers. And the 4th boy was being interviewed for scholarships. He was a national champ in wrestling in his weight class this year, and he was interviewing, and he went to the Citadel. I guess I shouldn't have mentioned names, but I did not mention the Citadel. He was interviewed by the Citadel. The coach turned him over to the captain of the wrestling team. The captain of the wrestling team took him to a party where there were the other team members and female companions, and they were all getting drunk, and he was invited to be a part of all of that. He did not.
Amen.
He went over, and he had no transportation, so he went over in the other room and just sat in the living room, and by the grace of God, fought off all of the temptations that were continuing. But he could have joined the crowd. He was more than 100 miles away from home in the government. If you're 100 miles away and you got a black briefcase, you're an expert. So he just, and I'm very proud of it. Very, very proud of it. I think God will honor that. And Daniel could have. The reason that Daniel isn't willing to do that is because Daniel had read Deuteronomy 28. I think he probably carried it around in his toga pocket. And where it was found, you just don't roll with the Babylonians. And Daniel believes God's word. And so he doesn't bow. God was just doing what God said he would do. And if God was faithful to his word there, he would also be trusted to be faithful in everything else. Everything else, including restoring Israel. By the way, Jerry, these dear folks are not mad at me.
That's what I was thinking. What'd you say?
Yeah. They owe me money and they know I was going to collect. They're all workers. Praise God. They're a blessing. They're going on to their task to be ready for the service. But God doesn't take disobedience lightly. He didn't then, and my friend, I don't believe he does now.
Right.
I read an article recently by Donald Hayes. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, Dr. Thorpe, but he's a writer-counselor in the Dallas, Texas area. And he talks about seeing a cartoon once where Moses is conversing with God on the top of the mountain. And in the cartoon, he's reporting to God on a survey that that the children of Israel had taken during concerning the popularity of the Ten Commandments. And Moses said, Lord, 73% are in favor of Commandments 1 through 5. 41% think Commandment 6 is unfair. You know, I didn't think to look up what 6 was. It's probably something important. But the 13% are opposed to number 7. 62 applauded number 8. 38 opposed, and so on. And Donald Hayes says, it struck me that in our world today we have moved so far from the thou shalt nots of Exodus 20 and even beyond the thou shalts of the Sermon on the Mount, to a situation not unlike that cartoon, where we decide which commandments we'd like to live under and we vote. He goes on and he says, the moral chaos of the world is such that we believe ourselves to be in our rights to argue with God himself about questions of right and wrong. Is that today?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's today.
Absolutely.
What I think is right is right.
That's right.
And if I think anything's wrong, then it's wrong. You know, it's as if God gets invited to Oprah or Ellen or Tyra or you know, any other inane daytime show. I hope you ladies don't spend all your time, or men, watching some of that. Yeah, some of that stuff.
Crazy, that's what you was gonna say.
Yeah. You know, and they, you know, his word, the Lord's word, is subject to call-ins and popularity polls, and that's where our nation is. You know, how many are for homosexuality? How many are for same-sex marriages? How many it's okay to have sex before marriage? How many think it's okay to cheat on your spouse? And what am I saying? Well, what I mean to say is that this is such a clear chapter that when it comes to God's people, there are just two possibilities. That's the bottom line of life, I think. That's what I believe Moses is saying. That's the bottom line of your life and mine. And you have made choices about this bottom line this week. You've made choices. You've decided either to live in obedience to God's word, or you have decided, for whatever reason, to live in disobedience. You've done that multiple times this week. I don't know your subject matter, but I know human nature. And we've made those decisions, perhaps flippantly, or perhaps with great consideration, prayer, and sweat. I don't know. But we've made that decision. We've decided to either live in obedience to God's word, or I've decided to live in disobedience. And we just need to understand that God's word clearly spells out that there will be consequences of that decision. And on that cheery note, I'm going to stop.